Right, good morning. I feel a lot of pressure at the moment because there's been some amazing speakers here before me. And of course, we've got the pressure of lunch coming as well. So I'm going to try and keep it as brief as I possibly can. Now, as Emma said, my name is Tineke. I am a population biologist by trade. And so that does mean that, unfortunately, I am a scientist, which sometimes is a bit much for people, but I try to keep it simple. I have also been a lecturer for 10 years. And so part of that is actually explaining to people from a very low basic level of understanding around what population management is really about. So yeah, my whole aim today is to keep it broad and to basically talk to you about why is, like if a dog kills a kiwi, why that has such an impact on a population going forward, all right? Sorry. So I think everyone has kind of already stolen my limelight here to say, you know, we've talked about dogs quite a lot. We've already touched on ferrets, and like many others, I am also from overseas. So I think we've got everything covered here, but for today, I think we've all agreed that stoats are the #1 killers for kiwi chicks. And then on top of that, we've got ferrets and dogs who are also able to tackle adult kiwi. So ferrets, yes, haven't been touched on much here yet, but that's because they are not yet very abundant here in Northland. However, they are coming. So we want to make sure that people are prepared for that. What we can see here on this map, I know it's very hard to tell from a far distance, but basically all the orange spots is where ferrets have been trapped. Many thanks to Doc for providing that map. But yes, they are a big threat to kiwi. They are very cunning hunters, as Michelle touched on as well. You know, they do need a different kind of approach to catch these cunning individuals. Thank you. Now, dogs, they are the single biggest threat. So pretty much in my short time as the operations manager at Save the Kiwi, dogs seem to be coming up as a very recurring pattern. And as you may have noticed today, today was no different, really. Pretty much everyone touched on dogs as being a major issue. Now, the difference for dogs is that they will basically kill for fun. Now, that's quite an anthropomorphic comment. But basically, you know, they are dogs. They do what dogs do. They follow their nose and they like to chase, you know, so we can't really blame them. Now, dogs are able to kill kiwi at all life stages, so it's not necessarily they're just after adult kiwi, but that's just kind of a bit of impact that has the biggest on our population recruitment. Now, this is my artistic skills on how to explain genetics, how that works in layman's terms. But basically what happens when you've got two kiwis, the same as like people, you know, me and my partner, we've got a couple of kids. Every time that you have you know, an offspring, half of your genetic makeup is passed on to the next individual, right? So that's why I did these little pictures here to kind of show that you get a bit of a different combination for every offspring or child that you have. All right, so that's why, for example, you can have families where you have kids, one child might be blonde and one might be a redhead and one might be a brunette. You know, it's possible, all these different combinations. So it just depends on what genetic makeup you've got. Now, we're just going to keep this picture in mind for a further slide later on, where we're basically going to have a think about how much of the genes actually get passed on to the next generation. Okay. Now, as someone who likes to look at numbers, it's always cool to put stuff in pictures. Now, also keeping in mind, whenever we're doing population management kind of stuff, we utilize a lot of estimated data. Okay, so we kind of project what could happen with a population. So in this little graph, I've basically listed how many eggs a female kiwi could produce. Okay, so we know that here in Northland, they are quite prolific breeders actually, so they can actually produce up to 8 eggs in a season. Not very common, but it does happen. But generally, say we're sitting between 4 to 6 eggs in one season. Environmental conditions will impact that as well, so with droughts, they'll produce less. If there's less food, they'll produce less, etc. But if we're looking, say, for example, a female that can produce 4 eggs in a season, so I'm just kind of taking this as like she always produces 4 eggs in her lifetime. you could set close to 200 eggs in one adult kiwi's lifetime. All right, so this is for a lifetime of 50 years old. Now, if we're talking about before, someone already mentioned that the lifespan for a kiwi here in Northland sits around 13. So you're effectively cutting out all their potential breeding right there. Okay. Now, for around survivorship to the next generation, so I'm just going to get you all to imagine that we've got a female brown kiwi. She can produce 4 eggs in a season. She is in an unmanaged habitat, so that means only 5% of those chicks survive on to adulthood. This female gets killed at 13 years of age, so she's only been able to breed for about 10 of those years. So from those 40 eggs, only maybe 2 chicks might survive to become adults. Okay. So if we think back about the previous picture where I had this really beautiful drawing, that kind of means that not all of her genes have actually been passed on to the next generation. Yeah, and so the tricky thing there is that we don't actually know which ones of those genes actually make the animals more suitable for survival in the wild. Yeah, so if, for example, if a kiwi's bill is a particular size, it might do better than if it's slightly smaller, yeah, because it can find food better. We don't know before they start breeding which of the animals is going to pass that gene on or not. Okay. Now, in comparison, we want to look at if the female lives to about 50 years, so then she would have had about 47 years of breeding. Again, this is for unmanaged habitat, yeah? So 5% survive, 9.4 chicks. So let's say 9, because I've never seen a 0.4 chick running around. But say 9 chicks survive to become adults. That basically is still not a very high number, but at least more genes have been passed around to the next generation, right? So, yeah. Thank you. Now, generally when we talk about, say if a dog kills a kiwi or it might kill 2 or 3, we don't necessarily think on the bigger impact this actually has on a population. So 1 or 2 birds doesn't sound like much. However, when we consider and keep calculating on how many birds we're missing in following generations, this is where the problem sits. Right, so in this number, I've just randomly picked a number of, say, 7. So if a bird can produce 7 chicks, so in the very first generation, so what we call our F1 generation, 7 chicks have been produced. Yeah, they've made it to adulthood. Now, if we take the same model data, those 7 chicks could also produce 7 chicks. So we get 49 individuals in the second generation. And those individuals end up to nearly 350 in the third generation. So the great-grandchildren of that very first bird that got killed effectively is missing us out on hundreds of birds in the subsequent generations. Yeah, so that's basically the impact that an adult death can have on a population. So where to next? I know you're all doing amazing work here on stoats, and I'm definitely not saying stop doing that and only focus on the adults. Absolutely not. Keep doing what you're doing, but also keep the adults in mind. Okay. So around ferrets, we're doing a bit of work around with DOC, talking about ratios for DOC 200s to DOC 250 traps, for example. We know the 250s also catch stoats, but we know that the DOC 200s can't catch ferrets. We want to make sure that we're training ferret hunters around each region as well, because that's effectively what we need. We need hunters. We don't need people just trapping for ferrets. That's a very different skill set. And John Bissell, I'm also a John Bissell groupie, so he's like really onto it with that. So we're going to try and set up some workshops for people around the country effectively. But also for different projects, we would like people to start thinking about what is your response plan. We know we currently don't have many ferrets here. But if they come, what are you going to do? Who is the person you're going to call? What have you got for resources to deal with them quick? Yeah, because if one ferret takes out one individual, there will be more. There will be more than one ferret around. And yeah, it can have a big impact. So around dogs, I feel like we've already talked about this a whole heap. But yeah, keeping them out of kiwi habitat. So it needs like that. We need to keep talking to people how, killing one kiwi doesn't mean it just stops there. It's actually the flow-on effect that it has on a population. We're talking about changing or making submissions into council bylaws work, making sure the dogs are kept in at night. education of pet owners. So Leslie in the back there, she's developed a program called Know Your Dog. So that's something that we're also looking into, sharing with people more. Just, you know, it's all about people understanding what dogs are all about. You know, we can't blame the dogs for killing a kiwi, but what can we do to make sure that people know how to look after them? And then obviously, Michelle's already touched on kiwi avoidance training, so for working dogs, pig hunting dogs, that kind of stuff as well. So effectively what it comes down to in summary, you know, we just need to make sure that we understand that if we have less breeding birds on the ground, we're going to be producing less chicks. When we have less chicks, we're going to actually reduce our populations in the end anyway. Thank you.
So I think we've got time for one question. If anybody has a question for Tinaka. Yes, Jack.
Hi, wonderful. Do you have any data on fertility over time? It seems amazing to assume that females would be as fertile for males and females.
It's actually a really good point, and so that's one thing that I've been talking to Emma about as well, is around, you know, there's actually a lot of information that we don't really have on kiwi yet. So I would definitely love to encourage more people to go out and do research, you know. I know Isabel's already nodding as well, going, yes, 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 we need more research. You know, there's actually very limited data out there. So at the moment we can only use what we've got. But we know that they can produce up to, you know, makes sense for most species do that, you know, they produce up to a certain age and then, you know, that's pretty much their time to go. So yeah, so we need more research done, a lot more detail.
Excellent. One more question if you have one. All right, very good. Thank you very much again, Tinaka.
Thank you.
There's a couple for you.
Thank you.